Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. It started with a power bill 8 times higher than usual. No errors, no faulty gear, just a silent thief in the night. As an energy systems engineer, I trusted the numbers, and they led me straight to my neighbor's garage. What I uncovered sparked a battle darker than any blackout. It started with a number that didn't add up. My monthly electricity bill had always been predictable, barely over $100 thanks to my solar panels and battery setup. But when the email from Lone Star Electric came in, showing a total north of $800, I thought it was a glitch. I double-checked my meter readings, checked the smart grid dashboard, and ran a full diagnostic on my inverter. Everything was fine, except for the fact that according to the system, my house had been pulling an insane load every night while I was asleep. I stared at the graph. Between midnight and 5 a.m., power usage spiked like a Christmas parade. I lived alone, didn't run a hot tub or crypto farm, and my only nighttime luxury was a coffee maker on a timer. Something was seriously off. The engineer in me couldn't let it go. I shut down every breaker except the essentials and watched the numbers in real time from my laptop. The consumption barely dipped. It was as if my house was powering something invisible. My first thought was a malfunction in the smart meter, but I had installed that meter myself. It was synced through Wi-Fi and cloud-logged every second of data. I decided to play detective. Over the next few days, I logged every appliance cycle, air conditioning pattern, and panel output, comparing them with the phantom spikes. They didn't match anything in my home. It was like someone had attached a leech to my system and was drinking electricity straight from my veins. I began inspecting every inch of wiring, starting at the basement breaker and working my way out to the exterior junction box. It was a calm Texas afternoon, cicadas buzzing, the air heavy with heat. When I crouched by the main panel behind my garage, I noticed something I'd never seen before, a thin conduit running out from the back of the metal housing and disappearing beneath the fence line. The insulation looked new, cleaner than the dusty cable bundles around it. My first thought was that maybe a contractor had rerouted something during last year's renovations, but I couldn't recall anyone working on that section. I followed the cable as far as I could, tracing it along the fence. It vanished straight through a small hole in the wooden planks, right into my neighbor's yard. Now, my neighbor Roy Campbell was not exactly a social butterfly. The man was in his 50s, worked as a mechanic, and had the personality of a sandpaper handshake. We'd exchanged maybe 3 words in the 2 years I'd lived there, all of them about trash pickup schedules. His garage light was always on late at night, the kind of place where you half expect to find a growling generator or something much less legal. I crouched there, staring at that cable snaking into his property, and my stomach sank. The realization hit me like a jolt. The mysterious energy spikes, the inflated bills, the constant nighttime drain. It all pointed in one direction. Roy was stealing my power. I went back inside and sat at my kitchen counter trying to process what this meant. I wasn't angry yet, just stunned. I checked my cloud logs again, matching timestamps with the hours I knew Roy usually tinkered in his garage. Perfect correlation. I couldn't help but laugh a little. If I hadn't been obsessive about data, I might never have noticed. Still, I wanted to be absolutely sure before accusing anyone. So I set up a plan. I would install a secondary monitor, maybe even a hidden camera near the panel, and capture proof. Years of working with smart grids had taught me that numbers never lie, but people sure as hell do. That night, I stood on my porch with a beer, staring at the faint glow coming from Roy's garage window. I could almost feel the hum of my own power running his tools. The irony wasn't lost on me. A power systems engineer getting robbed of power. It was personal now. Tomorrow, I would find out exactly how deep this connection ran. The next morning, I woke up with one mission: to confirm what I already knew. I gathered my tools, my old GoPro, and a small motion-activated camera I'd used back when raccoons thought my trash cans were a buffet. I set everything up carefully. The GoPro went into a waterproof housing I mounted behind the breaker box, angled perfectly toward the panel. The motion cam, smaller than a matchbox, I fixed inside a vent opening with a clear view of whoever might come snooping around. Every piece of footage would upload automatically to the cloud. If Roy tried to mess with my system again, I'd have his mug in high definition before he even blinked. For the next 2 days, I played it cool. I worked from home, pretended to tinker with code, but every hour I checked the feed. Nothing. just heat haze and the occasional leaf flutter. I almost convinced myself I was being paranoid. But on the third afternoon, while I was out running errands, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. The thumbnail made my blood pressure spike. There he was, Roy Campbell, in his grimy mechanic overalls, standing at my breaker box like it was his personal vending machine. He pulled out a small key, opened the panel door, and fiddled with the lower relay for about 30 seconds. Then he gave the cable a gentle tug toward his side of the fence, grunted in satisfaction, and walked off. It was so casual, like he was checking the mail. By the time I got home, my anger was simmering beneath a layer of disbelief. Watching him on that video, so calm, so practiced, made it clear this wasn't a one-time thing. He'd been doing it for months. I downloaded the clip, took stills, and organized everything into a tidy folder labeled Power Theft Evidence. Old habits die hard. I liked my data structured. That night, I called a licensed city electrician I'd worked with before, Ramon Diaz, one of the best in the Dallas area. I didn't tell him the full story, just asked for an inspection of suspected unauthorized wiring. Ramon arrived the next morning, a thick-set guy with a dry sense of humor and a clipboard that meant business. He spent an hour testing voltages, checking grounding, tracing circuits with his handheld meter. When he looked up at me, his expression said it all. "This line here," he said, tapping the cable that ran under the fence, "is definitely feeding out power that's not returning through your system. Someone's tapped in upstream of your meter." He unplugged his tester and straightened up. "You've got yourself a parasite, my friend." Ramon gave me a printed statement of his findings, complete with his certification number and time-stamped readings, official enough to hold up in court. I thanked him, paid his invoice, and uploaded everything to a secure drive. Next, I contacted the electric company. The rep on the phone sounded bored until I mentioned the documented theft and the electrician's report. Suddenly, I was transferred to their loss prevention department. They promised to investigate and follow up. When I did the math using my logs, I realized the total stolen power amounted to over $8,000 in less than a year. $8,000 for electricity. I sat at my desk, staring at the number on my screen. That was a used car, a semester of college tuition, or in this case, a mechanic's secret subsidy. That evening, as I was putting away my equipment, I saw Roy standing on his driveway, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. Our eyes met for a split second. His look was unreadable, flat, maybe a little suspicious. I gave him a polite nod, nothing more, but my stomach tightened. He had no idea I'd caught him red-handed. For now, that gave me the upper hand. I wasn't sure yet whether to confront him directly or let the authorities handle it. Part of me wanted to drag him by the collar to the meter and make him read the numbers himself. The smarter part told me to stay patient. I'd built my case. The next move had to count. Later that night, while reviewing the footage one last time, I caught myself smirking at the irony. I was literally an engineer specializing in energy systems, and someone had thought they could outsmart me by stealing my power. That kind of stupidity deserved its own award. But under the humor, there was something darker stirring, a quiet anger at the sheer arrogance of it. I didn't know yet how far Roy would go, but I was starting to get the sense that I wasn't just dealing with a thief. I was dealing with a man who believed he could do whatever he wanted and get away with it. When I finally decided to talk to Roy, I rehearsed the conversation in my head a dozen times. I wasn't looking for a fight. I wanted to give him a chance to make it right before the authorities got involved. Maybe some part of me thought this could still end with a handshake and a written agreement. Naive, I know, but I didn't expect what came next. I caught him outside on a Wednesday evening. The sun was dropping behind the rooftops, painting the sky the color of rusted copper. Roy was standing by his truck, tinkering with a toolbox like always. I walked over, folder in hand, keeping my tone neutral. "Hey, Roy, got a minute?" He looked up, squinting like the setting sun offended him. "What's up?" he asked, voice flat but cautious. I held out the folder. "I need to show you something. It's about my electric line." He stared at the folder, then at me. "What about it?" I flipped it open, showing the printed photos of him at my breaker, the electrician's report, and the power logs. "Look, I'm not here to start trouble, but I know what's been happening. You've been pulling power off my system. It's all documented. The utility company is already reviewing it, but I wanted to give you a chance to handle this before it turns into a police thing." For a second, he didn't react, just looked at the photos, then at me again. The stillness was uncomfortable, the kind that makes you realize you've just stepped into something raw. Then he laughed. Quiet, breathy, almost like he couldn't believe my nerve. "You think I need your damn power," he said, his voice sharpening like a blade. Maybe your fancy meter's just broken. I shook my head. It's not broken, Roy. I'm an engineer. I built this system myself. You know exactly what you did. The humor drained from his face, his eyes hardened, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower, meaner. You really want to go down that road. You open your mouth. You'll regret it. I know where your brother works. I know where your niece goes to school. Think about that next time you get the urge to play hero. The air went cold. My grip tightened around the folder. Are you threatening me? I asked. He smiled, a small, smug twist of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. Call it advice, he said before turning back to his truck. I stood there for a few seconds, pulse hammering in my ears. The calm approach was done. Whatever thin layer of civility had existed between us just cracked wide open. I turned and walked back to my house without another word, locking the gate behind me. Inside, I tried to steady myself. I dealt with confrontations before, angry clients, malfunctioning systems, even a blown substation once. But this was different. This was personal. When someone brings your family into it, the rules change. I called my brother Nate. He picked up after 2 rings. Hey, big man, he said. I told him everything. The evidence, the confrontation, the threat. The line went silent for a few seconds, and when he finally spoke, his voice had lost its usual warmth. All right, he said, calm but firm. You keep every piece of that evidence backed up. Send me copies tonight. I'm not stepping in as your brother. I'm stepping in as a cop whose family just got threatened. You understand? Yeah, I said quietly. Good. From now on, document everything. Don't confront him again. Let him hang himself with his own stupidity. After we hung up, I spent the rest of the night securing my house. I reinforced the locks, synced all my cameras to cloud backups, and added a new layer of security. Automated alerts that would ping my phone if anyone came within 10 feet of the breaker box. The system was airtight, but my nerves weren't. Every creak of the house made me glance at the window. I couldn't shake the image of that smug smile, the way he'd said my niece's name without ever meeting her. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about control. And he'd just made this a war. Around midnight, I checked the live feed one last time. Roy's house was dark except for the garage light. Always that damn light. I zoomed in. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, just a shadow passing the window, but maybe it was nothing. I told myself that tomorrow I'd talk to Nate again, maybe even get a restraining order started. Still, as I went to bed, one thought kept looping through my mind. A man who threatens your family isn't bluffing. He's already decided how far he's willing to go. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound outside had me checking the camera feeds on my phone, half expecting to see Roy creeping around again. By dawn, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for him to make the next move. I wanted every possible shred of proof locked down, multiplied, and untouchable. So, before heading into work, I set up a mirrored drive that uploaded all my footage and system logs to 2 separate cloud accounts, one under my real name, one under an alias I'd used for freelance projects. Then I hid a small flash drive with a copy of everything inside the insulation panel behind my refrigerator. Old paranoia from my engineering days at the power company was paying off. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. Roy didn't cross my property, didn't glare at me from his yard, didn't even turn on that ever-glowing garage light at night. It was the calm that comes before something breaks. I knew he was thinking, figuring out how to cover his tracks. On the 4th night, my phone buzzed around 2 in the morning. Motion alert, breaker box. I sat up in bed instantly. The notification thumbnail showed a dim flashlight beam and the unmistakable silhouette of Roy hunched over my panel. My heart hammered as I watched the live feed. He was disconnecting the cable, cutting his end clean, trying to erase his crime. I smiled grimly. The system had already taken snapshots, time-stamped, and sent them to 3 different servers. The idiot didn't realize I'd automated everything. I stayed still, watching him finish, relock the box, and slink back into the shadows. For a few minutes, I just stared at the dark fence line, weighing whether to call the police right then or wait. I decided to hold off until morning. I wanted a daylight inspection, witnesses, documentation, the works. By 7 a.m., I was outside with a cup of coffee, pretending to admire the sunrise while my camera recorded every inch of the damage he'd done. The cable was freshly cut, and the panel latch was scratched from his screwdriver. It was obvious someone had tampered with it. I took pictures, measurements, even scraped a sample of the insulation that had his greasy fingerprints embedded in it. That afternoon, as I was hauling my trash can to the curb, Roy walked over from his driveway. For a second, I thought he might actually apologize, but his smile told me otherwise. "Morning, Josh," he said, voice syrupy. "Beautiful day, huh?" "Sure is," I replied flatly, watching him wipe his hands on a rag that looked like it hadn't been washed since the Clinton administration. He nodded toward my house. "Heard some noise last night. You sure you don't have raccoons in that panel of yours?" I met his gaze. "No raccoons, just thieves." His grin faltered for half a heartbeat, then came back sharper. "Careful what you call people. Words have consequences. So do actions," I said, and walked back inside before he could answer. Once the door closed behind me, I let out a slow breath. It was surreal, standing on my own property, surrounded by cameras, and still feeling hunted. That evening, I packaged all my new evidence and sent encrypted copies to Nate and my lawyer friend, Lauren Kim, a local energy law specialist. Nate called within an hour. "You sure you don't want me to get a patrol car watching your place?" "Not yet," I said. "He's rattled. He'll make another mistake." Nate grunted. "You're baiting him. I'm giving him enough rope to hang himself." I didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, around 1:30 in the morning, I woke to the high-pitched shriek of my alarm. The motion sensors at the back door had tripped. I rolled out of bed, heart pounding, and grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the dresser. On the monitor, the backyard camera showed a dark figure near my back door, prying at the lock with something metallic. The floodlights snapped on, flooding the yard in harsh white. The man froze, then bolted, straight across the yard and over the fence. Even in the blur, I recognized the shape of his jacket, the same oil-stained denim Roy wore every damn day. I called 911, and within 10 minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled up, their blue lights flashing across my lawn. I gave the officers everything: video, timestamps, even the direction he'd fled. They did a quick sweep of Roy's property, but didn't find him home. One of the cops, a young guy with sharp eyes, said, "He'll be back." Guys like that always think they can fix what they broke. They took my statement and left me with a card for the case number. I sat in the kitchen afterward, adrenaline still buzzing, watching the replay of the footage. It was like watching a trapped rat, desperate, clumsy, cornered. He was losing control, and I knew what came next. Roy had officially crossed the line from petty thief to dangerous idiot. But I wasn't scared anymore. I had proof of everything he'd done, stored in enough places that he could burn my house down and still not erase it. What he didn't realize was that by trying to hide his crime, he'd just handed me the final piece I needed to bury him legally. The evidence didn't just survive, it multiplied. By the next evening, I was done playing defense. The attempted break-in had flipped a switch in me. I'd built systems my whole life to prevent chaos. Microgrids, backup batteries, redundant circuits, but nothing prepares you for the chaos of another human being who's decided to make you his obsession. I spent the morning walking the perimeter, inspecting locks, resetting the cameras, making sure every light, every alarm, every pixel of footage was backed up. The whole time I could feel the tension in the neighborhood, the kind that starts when the cops have made late-night visits. Curtains twitch, conversations hush when you step outside. That afternoon, Nate came by in his unmarked patrol car. He wasn't supposed to, a conflict of interest, but brothers don't always follow rules when someone threatens blood. He stood in my kitchen, coffee in hand, scrolling through the security footage I'd pulled up on the big monitor. "You've got him dead to rights," he said. "Breaking and entering, theft, tampering with a meter. It's a buffet of felonies." I nodded, but I could feel the unease creeping in. "He's going to get desperate," I said. Nate looked at me over the rim of his mug. "Desperate people make mistakes. That's when we nail them." He left promising to push for an official investigation through the department's property crimes unit. That night, I installed one more camera, a thermal one I'd borrowed from a colleague who tested smart grid transformers. It caught heat signatures even in complete darkness. If Roy so much as breathed near my fence, I'd see it. Around midnight, while I was in my garage soldering a new sensor, I heard a car door slam somewhere down the street. Then another. Too many. I killed the light and checked the monitor. 3 figures were moving near Roy's driveway. One was definitely him. The other 2 looked like hired muscle, guys with that half-drunk posture of weekend warriors. My pulse quickened. The trio headed straight toward my property line. I hit record on all feeds and slipped quietly to the side window. They were whispering, carrying what looked like a crowbar and a flashlight. Roy pointed toward my garage and said something I couldn't hear. They hopped the fence one by one. The motion lights exploded to life, blinding them. One of them cursed. I didn't wait. I triggered the panic alarm on my system, a full-volume siren that could wake the dead. The sound blasted through the night, echoing down the block. The men froze like deer in headlights. For a second, nobody moved. Then one bolted toward the street. Roy and the other guy hesitated, then scrambled after him. By the time the police arrived, 2 cruisers, sirens slicing through the air, the intruders were gone. But not before my cameras got every glorious second. The officers took my statement, reviewed the footage, and called in a supervisor. It turned out one of the men had been caught on a traffic camera speeding away in a black pickup minutes after the alarm. The plates traced back to Roy's cousin, a local with a record for property damage. It was enough for a warrant request. The supervisor promised to escalate it through the district attorney first thing in the morning. Before leaving, one of the cops, an older man with a tired face, looked at me and said, "Lock your doors and stay armed. Guys like him, they don't quit easy." When the cruisers rolled away and the neighborhood went quiet again, I sat on my porch, staring at the faint smoke rising from the streetlights in the humid Texas night. The fear had burned out, replaced by something colder, determination. Roy thought he was untouchable, but he'd just brought the law to my doorstep, and my brother's. By morning, this wouldn't be a neighbor dispute anymore. It would be an official criminal case. The next day, while I was at work, Nate called. "Good news," he said. "We've got the warrant. Me, a city inspector, and 2 deputies are paying Roy a visit tomorrow." His voice carried that calm authority I'd always envied. "You just keep your cameras rolling and stay out of sight. Let us handle it." I hung up, a strange mix of relief and grim anticipation washing over me. I'd spent weeks watching numbers, graphs, and cables. Tomorrow, I'd finally watch justice in real time. The following morning felt different. The air had that sharp, metallic stillness you get before a thunderstorm, even though the sky was clear. Nate texted me just after 9. "We're heading in. Stay put." I stood at my front window, coffee untouched, watching across the street as 2 unmarked cars and a city inspector's van rolled up to Roy's house. The sight of it gave me a grim kind of satisfaction. For weeks, I'd been the one reacting. Now the system itself was finally moving. Roy came out to his driveway as they approached. I couldn't hear their conversation, but his posture said everything. Puffed chest, defiant stance, hands on hips like a man auditioning for world's angriest homeowner. Nate stepped forward, badge visible. The inspector carried a clipboard and a small kit with seals and instruments. Roy gestured wildly toward my house several times, yelling something that made one of the deputies laugh. Then the inspector pointed to the garage and said something short and final. Roy hesitated, and that hesitation was enough. Nate gave the nod. The deputies stepped past him, cutting off his retreat, and went inside. For the next 20 minutes, I watched the procession like a live courtroom drama. They emerged with boxes, cables, a portable transformer, even what looked like a modified breaker panel with my property's labeling still on it. When they brought out an old utility meter with its serial number scratched off, my stomach flipped. That wasn't just theft, it was tampering with public infrastructure. Roy shouted until his face went crimson, then stormed toward the street, jabbing his finger in my direction. I stayed still, watching through the glass as Nate calmly read him his rights. The words were muffled by distance, but I could tell from the rhythm. "You have the right to remain silent." Roy didn't. He kept spitting curses even as they cuffed him beside his own truck. When they opened the garage fully, I saw it. An entire bench wired with illegal converters, surge suppressors, and an old power inverter that must have come from a salvage yard. He'd been siphoning my electricity not just for tools, but to power some kind of underground side business. Welding rigs, compressors, even a mini fridge. The city inspector later confirmed they also found a set of printed documents containing my full name, work history, and what looked like photos of my niece's school pulled from Facebook. That chilled me more than the hardware. The man hadn't just been stealing power, he'd been studying me. An hour later, Nate knocked on my door. He looked tired but satisfied. "We got everything," he said, stepping inside. "Transformer, fake meter, tools, your cable. It's all evidence now." He's looking at multiple charges: theft, property tampering, and criminal threat. He set his notepad on my counter. He also had a printed map of your house with security camera placements. You weren't paranoid. That last line hit hard. I'd spent weeks questioning if I'd overreacted, if maybe I'd gone too far setting up surveillance. Turns out I hadn't gone far enough. That evening, the energy company's loss prevention officer called to thank me. "You saved us weeks of tracing," she said. "This kind of theft costs the city thousands every year, and most people never notice." She told me they were filing a separate civil claim for damages to the grid connection. I couldn't help but grin at the irony. Roy's little scheme had grown into a full-blown public case. His name would be in court records, his workshop stripped, his pride fried like a blown fuse. When night fell, I stood outside, the hum of the power lines overhead sounding cleaner somehow, freer. For the first time in weeks, the air around my house felt normal. The tension had broken. The cops had done their job, the system had done its job, and now it was my turn to breathe. But as I looked at the police tape fluttering across Roy's driveway, I knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. Men like him don't fade quietly. They simmer, they brood, and they look for someone to blame. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, hearings, and maybe even retaliation. Still, for now, the silence was enough. The lights in my house glowed warm and steady, powered by nothing but my own system. For the first time in months, I was sure of one thing. Every watt in this place was mine again. By the time the court date rolled around, I'd almost started to feel normal again. Almost. I still checked the cameras every night before bed, still kept the alarm armed, but the immediate edge of fear had dulled into something else. Focus. I wanted this over. Roy had been out on bail for 3 weeks, and every time his rusty truck passed by on the main road, I'd catch that same old knot tightening in my stomach. He never looked my way, but that didn't matter. The idea of him breathing free air while pretending to be the victim made my skin crawl. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Beige walls, worn wooden benches, the faint hum of an air conditioner fighting a losing battle with the Texas heat. When I walked in, I spotted Roy sitting at the defense table in a cheap suit, 2 sizes too big, jaw clenched like he was trying to bite through metal. Across from him, the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Carla Hughes, was flipping through a binder thick enough to crush a cat. Nate sat in uniform near the witness bench, arms crossed, expression unreadable. When the judge entered, the room stilled. The hearing began with the usual formalities, then moved fast. The prosecutor laid out the evidence. The energy consumption logs, the electrician's certified report, the photos of Roy tampering with the breaker, the video of him and his buddies trying to break into my yard. She had the timestamps, the police records, the confiscated equipment. It was airtight. When she showed the jury a close-up of my power line spliced into his garage feed, even the stenographer frowned. Roy's defense attorney, a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, tried the only angle he could. My client believed the property line was shared. He was confused by the overlapping electrical installation. The judge raised an eyebrow. Confused enough to steal $8,000 of power and install a fake meter? The courtroom chuckled quietly. Roy's lawyer tried again, arguing that the theft was unintentional, that maybe he'd misunderstood a mutual agreement between homeowners. It was weak, and everyone knew it. When it was my turn to testify, I took the stand and swore in. I explained my background, electrical engineer specializing in smart grid systems, and walked the court through how I'd discovered the theft, how I'd recorded everything, how the threats had escalated. Carl asked clear technical questions. I answered with data, not emotion. Still, when I described the moment Roy mentioned my niece, the courtroom went silent. The judge's expression hardened. Then Nate testified. His account was concise, professional. He confirmed the investigation process, the warrant, the arrest, and the evidence seized from Roy's garage. The defense tried to imply bias because of our relation, but Nate was unshakable. I didn't act as a brother, he said evenly. I acted as an officer responding to a credible threat against my family. The jurors nodded slightly, the kind of subtle body language that tells you the tide's turning. The prosecution rested its case that afternoon. The defense called one witness, Roy himself. He shuffled to the stand, swore in, and started talking like a man trying to convince himself more than anyone else. He rambled about how everyone borrows a little power sometimes, how I'd always been arrogant and messed with his business. Then, in the middle of his tirade, he slipped. I didn't mean to hurt nobody. I just needed a little extra juice for my compressors, that's all. Carla smiled like a shark smelling blood. So you admit the power came from Mr. Draven's system. Roy froze. That's not... it wasn't stealing, it was... The judge cut in. Mr. Campbell, I suggest you stop talking. By the time closing arguments wrapped, it was already dark outside. The jury didn't even deliberate long, maybe an hour. When they came back, the foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The judge's sentencing was swift. 3 years in state prison, eligible for parole after 18 months, plus restitution of $8,243 to me and a $12,000 fine to the county for tampering with OS public grid. She also imposed a lifetime restriction on working with electrical or contracting equipment. As the bailiff led Roy away, he turned his head toward me, eyes burning with that same bitter rage I'd seen the day he threatened my family. "This ain't over," he hissed. I didn't answer. I just watched as the door shut behind him, the sound echoing like a breaker snapping off the last line of current. Outside, Nate clapped a hand on my shoulder. "It's over," he said quietly. Let him rot. For the first time in months, I believed him. The system had worked. Slow, clumsy, but it had worked. 3 months after the verdict, the neighborhood finally went quiet. No more police cars, no more curious stares, no more sleepless nights watching the fence line. Roy's house sat empty now. Foreclosure notice slapped across the front window. His once cluttered garage stripped bare by the county's evidence crew. The grass had grown wild around the driveway, swallowing the oil stains that used to mark his kingdom. Every time I walked past it, I felt the same mix of relief and disbelief. After all the noise, the silence almost felt heavy. Life had started to feel normal again. I got back to my work projects, designing new automation systems for local energy companies, and even took a consulting job to help audit a municipal grid. Irony wasn't lost on me. I'd become the guy teaching others how to detect power theft. My story had made the rounds in a few industry circles. A buddy convinced me to turn it into a detailed case study for an online forum. The post blew up overnight. Within days, I had emails from engineers, electricians, and even homeowners thanking me for breaking down how I caught the parasite neighbor. Someone on Reddit made a meme out of my solar panel readouts with the caption, "Steal power from an engineer." Bold move. I couldn't help but laugh. But behind the humor, there was purpose. I knew how close this had come to something much darker. Threats, break-ins, paranoia, all over a man too cheap to pay his own bill. So I poured everything I'd learned into that post. How to recognize irregular usage, how to track phantom loads, how to document tampering. The video tutorial I filmed in my backyard, How I Caught a Power Thief, racked up hundreds of thousands of views in a week, then millions. Reporters called. One local TV station aired a segment about the Dallas power sting. Nate joked that I was now the poster child for responsible paranoia. I didn't hate the fame, but I didn't chase it either. What I wanted was peace. My camera stayed up. My system stayed online, but now it was more habit than defense. I'd earned that sense of security the hard way. On weekends, my niece came over to play with the dog, and we'd barbecue in the backyard under the soft buzz of the solar inverter. She'd point at the fence and ask, "That's where the bad man lived, right?" And I'd nod, telling her, "He's gone now. The good guys won." She'd grin, then ask if she could press the alarm button, her favorite part. I always let her. The sound had once meant danger. Now it was just a reminder that the house was ours, safe and bright. One evening, after the sun dipped low and the panel stopped humming, I hung a new sign on my fence. Big white letters on a black background. "Stealing neighbors. I work with power. Good luck." Below it, I added a small QR code linking to my video. A bit of humor, a bit of warning, the perfect mix. The next morning, a few neighbors stopped by, chuckling. "Guess no one's stealing from you again," one of them said. "Not unless they're suicidal," I answered. We laughed, and for once it wasn't nervous laughter, it was the sound of closure. As months turned into seasons, the story faded. The local papers moved on. My video became just another entry in a sea of DIY investigations. Roy's name occasionally popped up in court bulletins, appeals denied, parole postponed, but I didn't bother reading the details anymore. I had already closed that circuit. Some nights, when the Texas wind swept through the power lines, I'd sit on the porch, listening to that faint electric hum. Clean, uninterrupted, mine. Power wasn't just electricity anymore. It was knowing I'd stood my ground, protected my home, and turned a nightmare into something useful. I'd learned that light doesn't just expose darkness. Sometimes it burns it out completely.